All right. So our second speaker is Mr. Alastair Mactaggart. He's a nationally renowned advocate for consumer privacy, and as a concerned citizen moved to action by the abuses of tech companies, he has been thrust into the national spotlight after successfully getting the nation's first statewide consumer privacy law passed, which you might know as the California Consumer Privacy Act. He's testified in Congress, and he's been featured on PBS, the New York Times, the NPR, and more publications. And now he's behind Proposition 24, which is on your ballots right now. So please let me introduce Mr. Mactaggart.
All right, are we all good here?
Yep.
All right. Well, hello everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for this opportunity to chat with you. I understand being on a Friday afternoon, you probably all have better things to do, but I'm happy to be here. And what I thought I would do is just do a little screen share here and talk you through this. So can you all see my screen now, Jason?
Up there? Looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, so I thought what I'd do is talk a little bit about the law, the current law, which is called CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. I have an overview there. The new law, the Prop 24, which is the California Privacy Rights Act, a little bit about how it came along, its timeline, some of the major features of the new proposed law, and then some concluding thoughts. So I think the most important thing to kind of realize is, at least for me, why are we doing, why did I get involved anyway? And, you know, for me, it's just that this is brand new technology. It just did not exist, you know, when you guys were born. I mean, it's really, really brand new. It's sort of the last 10, 12 years, really since the advent of the smartphone that we all carry around. And, you know, the ability of advertisers and big companies to put these geofences around any building and be able to track you going in and out of any building, the knowledge that comes with being in your home all the time, the power that comes with being able to profile you, you know, really shape your world is unprecedented. And as I say, you know, frequently, Standard Oil, you know, 100 years ago was a powerful corporation, but it did not know everything about you. So there's a new kind of power in American business now. If you haven't seen this new movie, this Netflix film, The Social Dilemma, I urge you to do so. It's well done. You may know a lot about it, but there's a visualization there that I think is important. And it does start to make you think, oh, maybe this isn't just about people knowing what shoes I bought, but there's a real implication for democracy as well. And that led me into trying to think about whether I could solve some of this with an initiative. And that was the first one, was the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that, almost exactly 5 years ago, I started doing the research, just really looking for whether or not this is something that a initiative would be appropriate for. And I didn't know anything about initiatives. I didn't know anything about privacy, but I started researching it. And I spent about 2 years. And I thought I, you know, got to a place where it was ready to file. So we filed an initiative 2 years ago. I should say that a good friend of mine, his name is Rick Arney, and he's the vice chair of the group. He was sort of my thought partner in this the whole way and was really a great influence. And so then we started gathering the signatures, and, you know, you need a lot, so you really can't do this yourself. We hired a signature gathering firm. And we ended up getting, you know, 630,000 signatures, which is kind of a fun fact. That's more registered voters in California than there are people in Wyoming or Vermont. And I'm always just, you know, it just shows you how big the state is. And so then we, as we were doing that, the opposition committee formed. And it's really like, it was everybody in tech. I mean, just everybody. And I added up at one point the market cap of all the companies, and this, you know, on the other side of the table was over 6 trillion in value, and that was a little daunting. Then what happened was this. We all remember this event. And that's when things changed a little bit for me personally, because suddenly people started saying, oh, this is what you're doing. You know, this is, we get that this is not just about, you know, your shopping cart, and this is about more than that. And I think that's when the legislature in Sacramento started to get interested in this as well. And that prompted this development, which I had not known could happen. So these are two fellows. One on the left is Assemblymember Chow, who's the head of the Privacy Committee in the Assembly. And on the right, it's Senator Hertzberg, who's the, currently now he's the majority leader in the Senate. And Hertzberg got a hold of me and said, let's do a deal. And I didn't even know you could do a deal, but actually he was involved in passing a law in 2014, which allows a proponent, once you have your signatures, you can negotiate with the legislature. And if they pass something that you like, you could, you withdraw the initiative. The public policy rationale is let's get the ballot smaller. Makes some sense, right? But I was pretty sure that they would never, agree to anything that I was kind of had my, heart set on in terms of what I thought were important. Why I was doing it. But actually they did. That was the most surprising negotiation I've ever been in. I actually think it's a better law at the end of that process than it was at the beginning. And a day I'll really never forget was on the 28th of June, it passed unanimously out of both houses. The funny thing about that is it passed about 2 p.m, and 5 o'clock was my time to withdraw it from the ballot or not, or leave it on the ballot. And the governor signed it at like 2:30. And there was some question about whether he was going to be out of town or not. And so it was really right down to the wire. And just to remind you what it does, sort of the 3 main things that the CCPA does, it gives you the right to know what information a company has collected about you, the right to say, don't sell that information. And then, if you're going to collect this information, hey, company, you got to keep it safe, especially all my personal information. So those are the 3 main rights, also some important rights for children. And so then now we come to this year, 2020, and this is called the California Privacy Rights Act, Prop 24. This is the proposition that's on the ballot in November. And the biggest question I get is, okay, well, you just did CCPA, what the heck, why are you doing this now? Right after you just did the first one. I think there's 3 main reasons. The first one is, if this passes, it will set a floor under privacy in California. And the way to think about that is initiative law is different than legislative law in California. And if an initiative is passed, the legislature cannot amend it unless the initiative gives that power to the legislature. And that was because when this law was put into place about initiatives, this constitutional amendment in the early part of the 19th century, the then governor was like, look, the railways own Sacramento. The mining company, silver mining company, the gold mining companies own Sacramento. We need to get power back to the people. And it's kind of funny that 100 years later, the new giant corporations sort of own Sacramento. And so we're relying on an initiative to take back power. What we've done in the current initiatives says, look, you legislature, you can't change this initiative going forward if it's going to hurt consumer privacy. But anything else you can do with a simple majority. So I think we achieve the best of both worlds. We give them some backbone. We let them the floor under privacy, but also as technology changes, as things change and develop, it allows the legislature to step in and do what it normally does, which is amend laws as they're needed. So that's the first reason to do another initiative. The second one is, if CCPA, the current law, is sort of GDPR light, this new one would be basically GDPR. And GDPR, for those of you who don't know, that's the European Union privacy law, probably the strongest in the world. And this would, for all intents and purposes, this law would achieve parity with that. The third one is this one vastly, dramatically increases enforcement. So those are the 3 main reasons. Our timeline was, I filed the first draft about just over a year ago. Then we had a long discussion with a whole bunch, anybody in the privacy world, the advocates, the privacy experts, the academics. There's a provision where you can, have that time to amend. We filed our final version in the middle of November, started getting the signatures, got over, 930,000 signatures this time. So that's now more registered voters than the population in 5 states or DC. The largest, privacy drive in American history. And there was some, getting on the ballot was not, it was COVID hit, and it was difficult to get our signatures. Luckily, election workers are essential workers. Riverside County was 15 minutes late turning in their raw count. There's a convoluted process when you're qualifying an initiative. But because they were 15 minutes late, the state Secretary of State's office said basically we're not going to give you any leeway for that, and we were at risk of missing the ballot. And we said, we understand everybody's got COVID, and it's a very difficult time to do business, but that shouldn't be our fault that the Riverside County missed their deadline. You should just cut us some slack. And they refused, and so we actually ended up suing them. And it's one of the, I think I'm the proponent. I mean, I sued the state of California. It's like I think it's the only time I've ever sued anybody personally. And we won. 2 weeks later, the judge totally agreed and said, of course, this is 900,000 people's votes. Stop standing on ceremony here. So we qualified. And so let's talk about what are the main features that this law does. One of them is this new ability to stop the use of your sensitive personal information. And this is information that's so sensitive that we feel like you should be able to say to a business, you can't use it. Okay, Uber, you can pick me up, but you actually don't need to know my race or my ethnicity or my sexual orientation. You don't need to know it. So don't use it. Don't collect it, right? One of the ones I like a lot is this notion of precise geolocation. I'm on the weather app. I actually can say, you can't use my location. So you can know I live in LA, so you can give me the weather in LA, but you don't need to know that I'm at the gym or at the fast food restaurant or at the clinic, which by the way is all sold immediately. So that's this. I like this. You can kind of blur your location within this area of about 250 acres. We triple fines for violating children's privacy. We require opt-in consent in order to sell the personal data of consumers under age 16. Enforcement, I talked about earlier, enforcement is dramatically stronger in this law than, if this law passed, than an existing law. So, never forget, we in California did have an Office of Privacy Protection, and Governor Brown disbanded it for budget reasons. But that could happen again, right? The Attorney General now has enforcement, and the Attorney General could just not get funded. Right now they're getting 4.6 million. That's the Attorney General and they've hired 23 people in privacy enforcement with that. So 10 million would equal about 50 people. And just the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, only has 40 people for the entire country. So this 50-person agency would be, I think, the most effective, strongest agency in the country immediately. And so then let's talk about some of the other benefits. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but there's a whole bunch of other benefits that Prop 24 has. And I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. But purpose limitation is only tell me what you're going to use my information for, don't use it for something else. Storage limitation, tell me how long you're going to keep my information, don't keep it longer. Data minimization, don't collect more than you need to do the thing you're telling me you're doing. Chain of custody, keep it safe. Don't send it off to someone else who's not going to, protect my information. You actually have to have reasonable security. There's a deletion expansion. So if I tell you to delete my information, you also have to be able to tell everybody you've transferred the information to delete my information. A new right, you got to correct my information if it's wrong. A new right, you got to see all my information, not just the last year's worth. This right to say you can't profile me. Am I only seeing certain jobs because of my ethnicity or my race? How do I know? How do I object to that? As I talked earlier about removing the right to cure, there's a new right to opt out of being essentially, this is a long way of saying being tracked across from site to site, and the requirement for annual cybersecurity audits, risk assessments. There's a creation of a new chief privacy auditor, a new consumer privacy fund from the fines, And as I said earlier, it really prevents the law from being weakened. And if you go on our website, CA Privacy, you'll be able to see lots of information about all the things that this law does that I think are better, way better than existing California law, and actually better, I think, than the European law. So, just in conclusion, I got to say, the fight over privacy reminds me of consumer regulation history in this country. And whether it's the auto safety, people fighting, the car companies fighting that, the cigarette companies fighting, regulation, or again, people fighting the clean air. No one really thinks today that we shouldn't have anti-lock brakes or airbags, or that we should still have cigarette vending machines in high schools, or that, it was a good world in LA when you couldn't see across the city. These are all things that were fought at the time by business, and now everybody thinks, okay, that's a better situation. I think that's what's going to happen with privacy. And I do think, I have this phrase, the data curtain, for you guys are all probably too young, but the Iron Curtain was Churchill's phrase about, two Europes and two worlds, where you had rights on one side in the West, and you really didn't have any personal, human rights in the East. And if you think about how data is being used in countries like Russia or China, maybe Turkey, to control Iran, to control their population, this technology is a spectacular way to control a population. It's never been more efficient. And we criticize those other countries. And yet these countries, these companies in our society are in many respects, they're doing exactly the same thing, and then they're so huge. Like Apple would be 15 in terms of a country, just based on its revenues. And Microsoft and Google are, I think, 25 and 26. I mean, these are extraordinarily large companies. So that's what led me here. We have a ton of support. We just got consumer reports today. Ro Khanna, the lieutenant governor, the controller. We have 11 senators who support us. And some of the big names. We got some unions, not just some unions, the firefighters, the construction trades, the nurses. I mean, we got a whole bunch of people. And so anyway, that's where that's why I got into this, and that's a little bit of the timeline. And I am happy to answer any questions if I can just figure out how to stop sharing the screen.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mactaggart. So now we're going to proceed on to the Q&A portion of your section. We got a lot of great questions. I'd like to start with one, which is, when you went against $6 trillion worth of tech companies, were you surprised by any of their tactics? How strong is the power of money in politics?
Well, it's an interesting question. For one thing I would say about the, I'll take this in reverse order. The power of money, I do get some criticism because people are like, well, you're just some wealthy guy who gets to do, why should you get to decide? And my answer to that is, well, I'm not a billionaire, and I've got less than a pinprick of wealth compared to the amount of money on the other side. And that amount of money is why we don't have any national privacy law in this country. That's been very effective at states and federal levels in stopping any debate going. So my relatively tiny little money compared to the $6 trillion was able to get this. And then it's still a democracy, right? So this law, Prop 24, won't be a law if people don't vote for it. So I do think the power of money is a double-edged sword, right? And then in terms of the tactics the companies took, we didn't actually get through a election last time. And the beauty, which was not planned, but it's just how it unfolded. The beauty of the way we've gone is the first time through, I think they could have beat us with a couple $100 million in the ballot box. We were polling well, but you can, spend enough money to convince anybody of anything, really. This time around is different, because this time around we already have the law, we're improving it, and the world has moved enough in 2 years that we always thought it was going to be very hard for tech companies to spend enough money, against their interests of their consumers, really, right? And also, tech is not monolithic. So Microsoft was the first company, and then Apple followed. They extended CCPA rights to the entire country voluntarily. So now, what's Google and Facebook supposed to do? Say, well, we think those are terrible companies, and by the way, the New Yorker's not going to get the same right as the just, So we have this in this weird world where it was really hard for them to spend money against this. So I don't think I've been on the full receiving end of $6 trillion. Let's put it that way.
All right. We have a lot of questions about Proposition 24 specifically. Angela Gia asks, what are the main concerns of the opponents of Prop 24? And Aaron Tran asks, he mentions that the ACLU opposes Prop 24 due to allowing pay for privacy schemes. What's your response to this?
It's really, I mean, it's obviously disappointing to us that they chose to oppose it. And actually, the more you get into the opposition, the more you're sort of like, okay, every one of these things is not a substantive argument. So the pay for privacy one is essentially, and the problem with ACLU is that they're a philosophy-driven company, or entity, right? And so that's why they go defend Nazis and child pornographers. Their concern is what is in existing law. So we don't change this section for anybody who's a real privacy geek. It's 1798.125. We don't change that section. That section is in the law, and it basically says, if you opt out of the sale of your data, the company can do something. It can charge you more. It can change your service. So you say, well, that's terrible. I should be able to opt out for free. But then you start thinking about it and say, oh, wait a sec. Newspapers oftentimes give you a product where you can go on the newspaper and you don't have to pay, you just see ads. Well, actually, when you're seeing ads, your data is being transferred. And today, that meets the definition of a sale in CCPA. So if you say, I don't want to have my information sold, that means you don't want to see any ads in the paper, essentially the same as showing up with an ad blocker. Well, how are they supposed to pay for themselves? If everybody does that, you destroy the free press. There is a world in the future where maybe all ads are contextual, but right now they're not. And we didn't want to be in a situation where we were basically passing a law that would really destroy the free press. Or, for example, I don't pay for Pandora and I do pay for Spotify. So one I hear ads on and one I don't. I'm okay with that. But that model would go away under the ACLU world. They want to have nobody have to pay anything for privacy. But the flip side of that means you can't monetize your data. And I actually don't think that's the right answer. I think they feel like privacy is a civil right, but that means it has no value. And in our focus groups and in our polling, people actually think, look, it's my data. I should be able to do with it what I want. And that's why Andrew Yang is the chair of our advisory board, because he also believes in this data dividend idea. I think it's pretty clear that at some point we're going to be in charge of our data and be able to share it with certain people or companies, and we'll probably benefit in some way. And so again, the ACLU argument is sort of a philosophical one. I think they're wrong. And as I say, I was really gratified that Consumer Reports endorsed us today. We have Consumer Watchdog. We have Common Sense Media on our side. We have NAACP. So we have some of the best consumer organizations on our side who disagree with them.
All right. Student Millie Lynn, that's my sister. She asks, countries who have successfully dealt with a pandemic have done so through using and sometimes even sharing their citizens' private information, like their location and movements. How do we protect individual consumers' privacy while balancing the health or safety of society?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is actually if you do some research into these apps that they wanted people to install and that would talk to other phones and give people a history of who they'd been there, turned out they sounded better than they were. So first of all, there wasn't a great take up even in Singapore, which is has a different approach to their government than we do. It was well under 25% of the people who voluntarily installed them. And the other thing which was difficult about those apps was, if I'm in a grocery store and you're in a grocery store and we're on other sides of the aisle, there's something in between, it'll show that we're within 3 feet of each other, maybe for 5 minutes if we're both sitting there standing or talking or whatever. There are a lot of false positives that were hard to figure out. Okay, I'm in an apartment, you're in an apartment, and we're literally separated by a wall. You're in your apartment, but we spent a lot of time in proximity, right? And then the problem was you had to do more invasive work to figure out, oh no, the signal strength wasn't strong enough. So actually Jason was in his apartment, I was in mine. So I think that what those countries were more successful at doing was testing and contact tracing. And you're already seeing a lot of contact tracing efforts in this country where people just won't call back. So unless you have people who are willing to engage, that's almost as big a problem. And I haven't seen yet where the technological solution solves for the technological difficulties. And what you really need is people who, we needed this not to get out of control. And the way to have done that would be to have better contact tracing initially, where when people were willing to, deal with it, and obviously having masks and basic common sense.
We got a lot of questions and we don't have enough time to answer all of them. So I think we can go with 2 more to stay on time.
I'm okay.
Okay. Student Kavita Murphy, she asks, what would be the next steps, both if Prop 24 passes and if it doesn't?
If it passes, I think we prosperity and happiness, and if it doesn't pass, doom and gloom. No, if it passes, I think we'll have much better enforcement in this country, and I think there's a much better path to the country having good privacy legislation. Either the other states will adopt some form of this, or the feds will. And I think if it fails, the companies are just going to have a absolute feast in Sacramento, because they're going to say, look, people don't care about privacy. It's too complicated. We're just going to change this one little thing here. Oh, there's just one little thing over here needs to be changed. And before you know it, 5 years from now, you won't be able to recognize CCPA or privacy in California. And there won't be anything done federally.
And I think we can end with this question. Do you have any advice for students that are thinking about heading into the tech industry on how we should keep ethics in mind?
Well, I mean, this is one area of ethics. I mean, I think it's like anything else. Do you like the people you're working with and for? They seem like good people. I think I've met some great, people along the way. As I say, think about what Microsoft and Apple did. They voluntarily extended these rights. The woman women are in both cases lead both those privacy divisions, and they're really committed to the cause. And they wouldn't work for those companies if the companies weren't committed to the cause. Look at Apple. Apple breaks your trip up into 10-minute increments, and it randomizes the identifiers so that even Apple doesn't know where what your trip looked like. That's that's privacy by design, and some companies do that, and Google does not do that. And again, I'm not saying Google's not ethical. I'm just saying I think as a person who's older than you guys, just the best advice I'd have for you about any job is just look around. Do you respect the people you work with and for?
All right. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, Mr. Mactaggart. We've all learned a lot today, and we're just so happy that you could come speak with us in the middle of quarantine.
My pleasure. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye.